Hello, welcome back to Young Americans for Freedom at UTA. My name's Cole Miller.
And I'm Julian Beatty.
Today on today's segment, it's actually going to be a 30-minute segment, maybe a little bit longer. First thing we're going to talk about is bridging the gap. We were invited from NAACP, BSM, SGC, and also Turning Point to host the discussion panel on a couple of issues they brought it up. One of the issues that one of the major topic issues that was brought up during that discussion was affirmative action. Uh, right now, I currently don't know too much information about that, but my friend Julian here knows a little bit more.
So, affirmative action is a policy that is practiced by many universities in which special consideration is given to certain groups of people. The three main groups of people which are given special consideration are people of color, women, and people from low income families. So, let's expand on this policy. So, why don't we talk about the argument that often people from these groups say that because we were disenfranchised, either historically, like in the case of African Americans through slavery or Jim Crow, or perhaps women in terms of voting rights, etc., or that why they think that we need affirmative action in order to correct those wrongs and even the playing field. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's necessarily like that because everybody has a way to show themselves towards getting that pay increase and everything. Like I myself, I started working out, and they when I started working out at 5 Star Ford, I got paid $9 an hour. I was getting paid $9 an hour, and then when the newbies came in, it was $10 an hour because everybody else was getting paid $10 an hour, and I was getting paid $9 an hour. I I had to show myself that I needed to get paid $10 an hour. You need to show yourself or show your managers what you can do in order to get those pay increase and everything. And I don't think it needs affirmative reaction.
So I think when we talk about affirmative action, it's sometimes best to approach things from the perspective of what's the underlying issue here and how are various groups of people trying to address this. I think the underlying issue here is really if there are people that have been disenfranchised through history in terms of segregation, Jim Crow laws, or sexism, whatever, these people tend to have unfair or lower chances of succeeding than those who do not. Even though we're, say, decades past that, those residual effects from the slavery, etc., still reside. That's really the point of contention here. And affirmative action is just the terrible execution of trying to fix that. The most productive way to correct this problem is by considering something called individualism. I think even progressives and conservatives and just about every American can agree that regardless of your circumstances, if you can put in the hard work and you can attempt to do the best of what's given to you, then you should have an equal opportunity to achieve greatness. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you actually will, but you do have the opportunity here. However, when we're talking about who has terrible cards given to them, that's kind of where the discussion breaks down. Some of the more progressive people say that just inherently being black or being a woman is just a disadvantage. Now, we can certainly kind of debate that, but I think in terms of resources like having special tutoring, being able to go to a private school where the classroom is much smaller, not having to worry about sort of family instability, I think those are what really disenfranchise people. But those are all primarily function of income, not necessarily race or gender. So in terms of what we should be giving special consideration for, I don't think that color and gender is really a wise decision. For instance, I'm an African American, and I had the privilege of going to the best private school in Sri Lanka for 3 years and the best private school in Tokyo. I'm not disenfranchised. I shouldn't be given special consideration over someone who went to a high school that looks like a prison. So now that we kind of established that most of these disenfranchising factors are just functions of income, we should be able to discuss, okay, well, if this is a group that we need to give special consideration, how can we give them special consideration? In my opinion, I don't think we need to have this very robust, consideration. I think that how we have it in Texas is actually pretty good. It's basically the top 10% rule, which is if you graduate in the top 10% of your high school, you have automatic admission into any public four-year university in Texas. And that includes our flagship UT Austin, which for the most part is the most prestigious public university in Texas, one of the most prestigious universities in America. And I think everyone can get behind that. But what we have right now is not really affirmative action. It's not really helping people. There are people that get left behind, particularly high-achieving white men who aren't able to get into universities that they arguably should, and also high-achieving Asians, which, it's basically gotten to the point where it's discrimination. If you go to Harvard, there's something called a likability score. And just coincidentally, all of the Asians have low likability scores. Now, I think that is racism, and I think that is wrong.
So, in summary, it's not unethical for us to give special consideration to people, but there is a logical limit to who we should consider and to what extent. What we have now is more or less racism. We should be considering people based off of their family income so that we can have things like individualism, but just blanket giving people kind of free admission into all these private universities just because of their race and their gender, I think that's wrong. So now let's talk about culture upbringing.
I'm going to jump in for culture upbringing. Culture upbringing was brought in from Bridge the Gap, mostly shared about blacks' culture upbringing with their fatherhood and everything not being there. And that kind of bogged my memory. I'm like, well, what about white or Asian or Viet culture upbringing? Because I'm white and my dad's a truck driver. So he wasn't there for most of my life. So I had to kind of symbolize somebody else as another father some days. So having that kind of shocked me too. I didn't go into gangs or whatever. I went to elementary was all right. I went to Butler Elementary. Then I went to Shackelford. I got to witness a lot of gangs and everything. Got assisted later. Started like that. Junior high school. And then Lamar hit high school. And we saw a bunch of gangs actually popping up there. A lot of people acting out and everything. So you can kind of tell the culture upbringing of a father figure or mother figure into everybody's life, helping out and devoting a person how they want to turn out. A culture upbringing should be, what I figure it should be, was that a father is teaching his son what not to do and what to do. What's a good thing to do? What a good thing not to do? How to throw a baseball, how to cut something, how to fish for something, how to do something correct in order for him to not go through the exact same struggle as his dad's gone. And being a person like that, my dad actually kind of showed me stuff, but yet still has to truck drive, still bring bread onto the table. So it's kind of hard to symbolize between white and blacks how the difference is, but it's all one thing. If a parent figure is missing out of a child's life, that child's going to change no matter what it is. No matter if it's black, white, Asian, it's going to change. It's going to be different from another person bringing with two family figures raising a child. So no matter if it's, I think the study goes, no matter if it was gay or just straight, like man and woman or gay, it was the exact same child upbringing. But if you see one missing family member, mother or father and father, or wife and wife missing, if one is missing, then the child's going to change differently. Yeah, the father role model is a big, humongous influence in America's life, in America's upbringing. right and wrong, differences. It's one of the issues that everybody needs to address. Another good reference is a good reference from this is a song I kind of listened to. Is called "I'm Not Racist" by Jonelle Lucas. If you have a chance to listen to that song, I think that song actually brings up a big racial gap rather than father figure gap too. Julian right here is nodding his head a lot. He wants to bring up something too about this issue as well. Julian, will take it away.
Sure. So, as an African American male, I was one of many African Americans that grew up in a, for the most part, single parent household. And I think that we just need to look at the facts here. Especially in African American households, almost half of those families don't have a father figure in the majority of their children's life. So, people will try to debate whether or not that's important, but let's just kind of look at some brief statistics. In general, black sons without a black father are more likely to drop out of high school, more likely to be obese, more likely to abuse drugs or join a gang. These things are generally seen as bad. And what I find really interesting is that other communities, sort of the white community, the Hispanic community, they tend to be a lot more open to this issue, such that they'll recognize that, oh, well, this isn't really something that's good. But from my experience in the black community, they seem to be a lot more defensive and say that, well, yeah, it's true, but even though we may not have a black father, it's not necessary, and these are other issues. And what I find disturbing is that they think that they can take the black father and they can compartmentalize him into various different role models, such as, okay, so well, we can take the black father male, we'll just get, Uncle Steve, he'll be the masculine part, and then we'll just take, another black person, and then he'll be, the black part. But it's not like algebra where you can just add things together. There's something inherently different when you have a black father in your relationship.
Yeah. And father in any relationship, basically, there's always a certain missing subject, like a stepfather. He tries to be that fill in the shoe, basically, and sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. They can't reach out to that kid. I think it comes to a certain age too. Really, it depends on a certain age and a certain criteria. So, in summary, that was a clear understanding of what they were talking about and bridging a gap from both sides. The father figure is an important role. So our next topic issue that they brought up was, in Bridge the Gap, was the financial aid for college. Julian actually talked about a meeting about that for YAF. So take it away, Julian, and see what you got.
So, the cost of education has been rapidly rising over the past 20 years, and for a lot of reasons. We can kind of get into depth in another segment about this. But from that stems the idea that the government needs to get more involved and need to be increasing financial aid to students so they can afford college and they have less loans. Now, that might sound good in theory, but, the world's a lot more complicated. From my research, I came across this sort of hypothesis, which has basically been verified. It's called Bennett's hypothesis. It's the theory that whenever the federal government widely disperses financial aid to the form of Pell Grants, particularly subsidized or unsubsidized loans, universities will increase their tuition to capture as much of that financial aid as possible. Now, universities will obviously disagree, but the statistics from the Pew Research say otherwise. So this kind of gets us to a broader problem of, well, what's the role of financial aid? Well, we have to realize that these universities kind of have their own agenda. They don't really care about the student debt. In my opinion, they don't really care that much about the student, except in a very narrow legal sense. So it's difficult to just give financial aid to students because the system is so broken that the universities will just take advantage of it.
Yeah.
So here are just kind of some of the ideas that I saw floating around on the internet that I thought were a really good idea. So the first is that instead of having your expected financial contribution be dependent on what university you're going to. So if you go to an expensive private university, you get more financial aid. Whereas if you go to a community college that's cheaper, you get, less financial aid. What it should be is your financial aid should be based off of the median cost of attendance in that state. So if you go to a private university, well, you don't get more financial aid. If you go to a community college, well, assuming that the community college has a lower cost of attendance than the average university, well, technically you actually get more financial aid, and that kind of encourages universities to be more competitive.
Oh yeah.
The second thing is that you just have to regulate. You either have to regulate universities based on what they can really pay, what services they can offer to bring down costs, or you can attach a free market incentive, such as like co-sponsoring loans, and we can talk more about that in detail. But the problem is that you cannot give financial aid to students knowing that the universities will take advantage of that. You have to make changes on the institutional level before you can disperse aid. So like let's just take a step back and look at Bernie Sanders' plan. Bernie Sanders actually isn't giving you free college for all. What he's saying is that, okay, if universities are collecting $50 billion worth of tuition, then the federal government will disperse $50 billion worth of basically university grant money. And instead of taking the tuition money, they're going to keep everything the same, and they're going to take the money from the federal government. Wrong. Completely wrong. Bennett's hypothesis. What they will do is they will probably take some of the federal money, of course. Maybe they'll drop tuition a tiny bit, but they're just going to, pocket the money from themselves. So you have to change the institution before you can give this aid.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be pretty much brought up in our third podcast. What's going to be our next podcast is going to be about the Electoral College versus popular vote. Not public vote, but popular vote. Austin, our vice president, and I think it's going to be our next president because Tanner's stepping down. So sad. He's going to talk about that more on the next meeting. So what happened this week is we love to do at YAF is a Berlin Wall. We'll build a Berlin Wall size, not as big as the Berlin Wall, but pretty big, sheetrock size, and spray paint what we want to accomplish in a year. What we wrote on there was leftism, Antifa, communism, religious persecution. So we had a lot of stuff on this Berlin Wall. We had Antifa, I think we said, segregation, culture, abuse, gun control, red flag events. Don't even get me started on that. That's funny as it is. Communism, I think we just said. Oh, there is abortion on here, actually. Yeah, it's like right in the back. I can barely see it. Or is that Reformation? I think that's Reformation.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I feel like there's abortion somewhere there. I don't know.
I feel like there is. We're going to look through here. I'll post up. We're going to have video up on here for this stuff. Segregation's on there, of course. Oh, let me go back to that video. We have our treasurer, Gregory, swinging the hammer like Thor, about to hit something. And he goes for, I think he goes for religion persecution first off. Yeah, he does. Censorship was on there. The cuss word, like exclamation mark, cash symbol, asterisk, pound, at was on there for a cuss word. So a lot of stuff was on there. It was actually kind of nice. So, like I said, we had the cops drove past us 3 times. That was the funny thing. For no apparent reason. Tanner said last year they put the swastika on there and the communist sickle and hammer. And we they got called on us because of that. So I don't know why they do
I mean,
that.
the whole point is that we're saying that's not good. That's why we're getting a hammer and we're crushing it. So
Yeah, but not a lot of people know that. They just said, "Ooh, there's swastikas on there." No, we're gonna destroy
yeah,
this
it's like
at the
an
end.
anti-demonstration almost, not a
Promotion.
Yeah.
People are seeing that. They're like, What is this?" Well, they don't understand it. They don't stop and talk. They just look and go. And that's when you get people more aware of. I think there was a lot of people here, Tanner said, than at his first one. So a lot of people came in and like destroyed this wall. So we have our own natural people, and then we have me, and we have some newbies in here. Professor Liggett was out there. One of my good friends I met at TCC was out there. He brought 2 students in with him. That was actually kind of nice, kind of cool. A funny story about this before we started destroying it. We were setting it up, and the wall. We were setting up one of the walls, and one of the walls actually fell. We had it up there in the air, and one of the walls fell and hit one of our vice president's truck, and broke religious persecution on there. So technically, a truck at the first string at the wall because of wind. But we were trying to get it. We're trying to keep it steady and try to find something to keep it supported. And we had to get more screws. So, bless my heart, I hate to say this, but I had to give my keys up to my other friend, Justin, to go get more screws to hold the wall up. And while he was gone to do that, we had one of the progressive people come in and talk about the wall and like some of the stuff that was on there. And then he kind of stopped a young guy. He had a UTA radio shirt on, and he was a liberal. Straight up, not liberalism, leftist. He was a straight up leftist, and he knew gun control should have not been on there. Like everybody should have gun control. But it was funny thing is, me and the progressive guy actually talked to him and said like, why it should be on there. He's like, I'm in control of some gun laws, but not like that many gun laws. Like guns should be outlawed. Like I don't get that. And we actually talked to him. Progressive and YAF do not team up much, but if we do team up, it's usually against like hardcore leftism or Antifa people, except for Mark. I think we differ. Good old Mark. But yeah, this was a pretty fun week. YF had bridging the gap, also doing the wall. There's going to be more later on this week, but to wrap it up, we finally have shirts. Mm-hmm. Julian has a shirt. Technically he does not have a shirt, but I do. He wasn't there at his meeting. Where were you? In Las Vegas?
Yeah, I was on a research conference. I'm a physicist, so do my research there. Didn't get the shirt.
Don't worry, he's gonna get his. He was supposed to get it Wednesday, but he was a little busy. We're gonna get his next Wednesday or this week. Justin's on campus. He's gonna get it. I got a shirt. It's awesome. Check him. I think you can check him out on our website or check him up on Instagram or Facebook. I think somebody posted him up there. It's actually pretty cool. $20 if you want one. Email us, message us. We'll try to get one in for you. And as always, think right. Think differently and think right, basically.